You are the co-founder of Reebok. You founded it in 1958 with your late brother, Jeff. So one of my questions are, what was the most expensive mistake that you think you've made in business as you reflect back upon your journey?
Well, that's a tough one. Expensive mistake. Oh, I, I find that difficult to answer. Expensive mistake. What was it?
What about Lawrence?
It must have been. Julie, my external hard drive, she is reminding me of one of the, possibly the most expensive mistake was appointing a company called Lawrence Sports as our UK distributor. It was most expensive because whilst it should have worked very well, and taking over the distribution in the UK would allow me then to go global, would allow me to look across to America or Europe or whatever. That was good. Unfortunately, though, and you've obviously read the book or reading the book one way or the other, but of course, it meant that we sort of put all our eggs in one basket. All our production was going in one direction. Possibly not all, but 80% of production was going in one direction. And it's regrettable because my friend, who was then the sales director of that company, he moved. He left the company. He left the company because the owner of the company decided to retire and put his son-in-law in charge. And his son-in-law was an engineer, not a businessman. So his son-in-law was more interested in doing engineering jobs than running a business, and got the business side completely wrong. And so that company, within 2 years of me signing a deal for them to be my distributor, they went out of business, which meant that I had no sales for my products. That was probably expensive. Although when we say expensive, it was one of those problems that we turned around, because they held a lot of our shoes, which they hadn't sold, and I had to go collect the shoes, bring them back, and we had to put our heads together and think, how do we sell these shoes? Because if our bank finds out we've got a lot of shoes and no money, we will be out of business as well. So we went round to a lot of schools, a lot of places, and we made deals to sell the shoes through the schools to the students. And I think we managed to succeed in selling all the product in about 3 months. And the advantage of this is we actually got more money for those shoes than we actually were selling them through the distributor. So in a way, it was a win, but my word, it could have been a very expensive mistake.
Correct. So question, you have been designing women's shoes for a very long time, and back then it wasn't very, I think you said maybe New Balance was the only one who had created an athletic women's shoe. So it's kind of like a piece of history. So have you had any memories of any women that have thanked you for opening that door?
Well, we only ever bumped into making women's shoes when we found aerobics.
Okay.
Otherwise, and the shoes you see today in most sports stores are unisex. They're not made for women. They're made for men. They're unisex. We just start at small sizes. And I think the only thing we did as far as women was really make them pink as against white or blue. So you put a woman's color in it. So really, we didn't have any experience of making women's shoes per se. A woman's shoe would be with heels. We never made shoes with heels or anything like that. They were just the same shoes that men wore. But when we actually found aerobics, the guy that found it, Angel Martinez, he came up with the idea, why don't we make this on a woman's last? So it was only going to be made on a woman's last. That's a piece of wood that you make them on. Why don't we make them in just women's sizes and make them from glove leather? because the women would love to put this shoe on. It just felt like putting a glove on. So that was the marketing side of it. And so that's really the only experience I have really of making specifically shoes for women.
And does anybody?
So
Okay.
go ahead. You gonna say something?
It's yours.
Okay. So in your book, you talk about scaling from $0 to $900 million within 5 years. And what would you say was that one change that created that exponential growth?
Well, you know, when Jeff and I, we left our parent company, as you've probably read, we left the parent company and to start our own sports shoe business. And the biggest sports shoe business in the UK was for soccer. But Adidas were a large company in those days. They're larger still now, but to us, they were a large company. And they really had come into the UK from Germany, and they owned the soccer market. So we couldn't go there. So we went to track and field. And the reason we went to track and field and we went to running was we were looking for what we called white space. Where is it that we can go where there's nobody else, that we can make a difference? And, you know, we could make a difference. We were young, we got involved. So we could go into spaces that really meant that difference. And of course, that's how we looked at it when we went to America. We got into America. It took me 11 years to get into America, but that in itself is a story. But when we were in America as a running company, because we entered there with 3 5-star shoes, when we were in America, it was one of our guys, again, Arnold Martinez, down in Los Angeles. His wife was going to aerobic classes and coming back, and she was full of it. And Arnold said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "We're doing aerobics." And in those days, Arnold said, "I'm sorry, what is aerobics?" Well, she said, "Well, we're exercising to music and we love it." So it was from that Arnold went to turn to the next class, and he saw what was going on. The instructor was wearing a sneaker. Half the class were wearing sneakers. The other half, they were barefoot, no sneakers. And that gave him the idea. But that was the biggest piece of white space that we moved into because there was nobody there. So for us, it was, okay, find your way in. And all of a sudden, from being a running company, and Jane Fonda actually went out and bought a pair of aerobic shoes to use in her videos. And that was it. We suddenly just went crazy. The sales, as we say, we were about a $9 million company, running company. And in just over 4 years, we went up to $900 million.
Wow.
And we became a women's company.
What would you say because fads and trends change so often, that was one shoe that maybe didn't do well then, but if you were to bring it back today, would do well, do you think?
Oh, goodness me. I mean, I think all the shoes that we made are now coming back as retro. This is what happens in the footwear industry. There's only so many different styles, different ways you can make the product. The changes are slightly different in design. In many ways, it's a bit like, you know, cars are the same. You recognize a car because its shape, its design, and then they change something slightly. They don't dramatically change anything. And so what we're doing now is bringing back retro shoes. Shaquille O'Neal's, there's a lot of these shoes that are coming back because it's the retro designs. And all you do, if there is anything new, there may be some new rubber that you can use these days, a lighter weight rubber. And yes, it's very low tech. It's not high tech making a shoe, but I mean, you've just got to observe that it needs to be comfortable, and it needs to work. It needs to be sustained. Our first aerobic shoes didn't; they fell apart. They were made from glove leather, and glove leather is too soft, and it's not got the strength for you to put your foot in and start jumping about in. Glove leather is made for gloves, and that's a totally different thing. But we got it right though. We persisted. But that was one of the biggest spaces. So moving into white space areas where nobody else was, but also, as we say, those shoes, the freestyle. I'm sure. I know they bring the high tops back. I think they could bring any one of those shoes back. Maybe some of these specialist shoes. We had a shoe for cross country, and in the UK we had that shoe. I don't think I'd like to bring that shoe back.
So one last question for you. Okay. If your brother, Jeff, were still alive today, would the trajectory of the business have changed? Or was the passing of your brother the motivation and the drive for you to push forward and make sure that you succeeded?
Well, I know that Jeff, he loved being in the factory, so he loved making shoes. And he let me do everything else. So he let me make the mistakes and play around and try to get the marketing right. But I think, and it's a difficult one to ask, because we can't change anything. But I think there would have been some slight change. There would have been a slight change in how we progressed after we got into America. I think there would have been a slight change. But we grew bigger than Adidas. We grew bigger than Nike. And we became #1. So I wouldn't have looked for too much change, I don't think.
Okay. And what's next for you in the next upcoming years?
What's next for me? Well, of course, after stepping back from Reebok, and during my time in Reebok, we didn't have computers. We didn't have cell phones. We had nothing smart. Only when I'm sitting back in Tenerife and enjoying the sunshine, then we got computers, and then we got cell phones, and then we got Wikipedia, and we got Google, and they started to tell me how Reebok started.
Okay.
And it was all wrong. We didn't do that. And there was a photograph of Joe Foster, the founder of Reebok, and it certainly wasn't me. So so that's the time when I wrote the book. And it took a while to get the book out, but eventually it got out there. And whilst I wrote the book to put the story straight, a lot of people from universities and from MBA classes, they said, this is more than just a story. This is a business book, because this tells a lot of people the problems you went through and how you answered them. Tells them that to be successful, you have to be persistent. You have to keep going. You have to, and you have to enjoy it. So that really is what we're doing today. And it's not 2 weeks since we've moved back from America, and we're traveling again in another 2 weeks, and we will back in America early next year, again to tell the story.
Thank you so much, Joe.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
You too.
Thank you.